I found out because I was at the Royal Society, I think last summer it was, and I met Barbara Sahakian, Professor of Clinical Neuropsychology, and I was there because I narrate this documentary that Professor Stephen Hawking does for the Discovery Channel called Stephen Hawking's Universe. But at the end of a little clip of the highlights of the coming season, they then had this fantastic discussion about where science is, where it could be in the next 20 years, and what are the issues facing both science and the world, and what the world needs from science. And it was so eye-opening, so articulate, and the level of discussion was so invigorating that I kind of went out on a high. I hadn't really heard such extraordinarily clear ideas, brilliant communicators, fantastically interesting subject matters discussed with such intelligence for a long, long time. And I met Barbara afterwards in the corridor, and we were fired up, and we were talking about certain aspects of what came up. And in particular, I think an understanding of science, as in the media image of science, the need for light bulb moments and eureka headlines in order to engage the public interest, to fire up funding, and all of the sort of social and ethical issues that are complexified by how science presents itself in the world. I got talking, of course, I started getting very excited thinking about the ethics of science, really my work, and Frankenstein, and the little sort of shards of involvement or links to her incredible expertise that I had and an interest that I had in them. And we talked and talked, and she went, well, look, should we keep in contact? I said, well, I'd love that, because I want to have more conversations, and I want to hear more conversations like the ones we've just heard tonight. And she was good to her word, and I kept in contact with her, and then I got a call a few months, I guess, later saying, how would you like to be the guest director of the Cambridge Science Festival? And I went, oh, God, what have I got myself involved in? I'm not a scientist. I wouldn't know where to begin. And how on earth do you cover as broad a canvas as what science is? I mean, how do you begin to encompass, say, for example, Barbara's specialty in neuropsychology, with Stephen Hawking's specialty in astrophysics, and just how on earth you answer the questions, the very, very large how and why is the universe in existence, to what a very specific trial psychotropic drug might do to an Alzheimer's patient. And then I thought, well, that's exactly it, isn't it? And then all you have to do is personalize your interest with your work and what you have engaged with as a layperson outside of the requirements of roles or performances or jobs, and dive in. And I kind of did, and they've been brilliant. They've been very supportive, and I sort of suggested a couple of things and wrote the introduction, and I wish I could be there in person, but as I begged them to realize early on, because of my very fortunate position at the moment, I seem to be working non-stop, and that's a good thing in an actor's life, so I have to just keep doing that until the offers dry up. But I'd love to be there in person. I just think it's fantastic. I think to have a forum where adults, young adults, curious lay people, as well as experts and as well as children, can come and literally get incredibly messy with hand paints, with lights, with whatever interactive tools they're going to be using for the family events, and then sort of working your way up from that, the more sort of jovial things like the crime scene, which is I think might be a fun thing for the family to go and visit and try their hand at being a detective, to some of the leading experts in the world coming to talk about their disciplines, is terribly exciting. And to have that all under one umbrella it's a great thing. It's a great reason to shout out about it. So here I am shouting out about it.
It's very interesting that you should mention both Professor Barbara Sahakian and Professor Stephen Hawking, because they both exist in very different realms of science, and arguably they both have very different reasons to want to communicate their science. Barbara, for the uninitiated, is a neuroscientist and works in schizophrenia, in smart drugs, in conditions that are very heavily stigmatized in the public, and so there's clearly a drive for her to help people understand what these conditions are, where they come from, how we can treat them. Stephen, on the other side, of course, is working in cosmology and some of the biggest questions we can ask, which is far more abstract, and the drive to communicate that is far more about getting people interested in asking people to be curious about the really big questions. Do you think you can easily bring these two aspects together into something like a science festival?
Well, for that very reason. I mean, I think it answers in the question. The amount of variety of disciplines and the extraordinarily different disciplines that science encompasses answer questions as varied and broad as how can we use a new drug to affect patterns in the brain that may determine whether or not Alzheimer's is going to take hold, or a psychotropic drug that needs to be researched and marketed and have an immediate application, to questions of how we came into existence and what existence is and the very nature of our being. I think that's what's wonderful about a science festival, is that you can basically cherry pick which end of those polarities you want to explore, and rather than being something that's specializing like a conference perhaps would in one specific discipline, you have the ability to go to your interests within this program, which is, one of the reasons I applaud it. I think a science festival is a really amusing and entertaining and informative way of engaging with these very important and influential topics.
I suppose for the same reason, science festivals are a fantastic vehicle for children to find out what it is that they might be interested in. You have a child who has a sense of wonder about the world, a sense of enthusiasm for science. An event like this will allow them to see what it's like to be a biologist, what it's like to be a neuroscientist, what it's like to study the cosmos, and actually start to form aspirations towards being a scientist.
Yeah, I think anything that encourages curiosity. Children sometimes in a very difficult way, ask why. And that level of curiosity, that seed of wanting and questing and thirsting for knowledge is what's so extraordinary about what science can give as far as a view into understanding the whys of the world. It's a great introduction, I think, for children. There are lots of very child-friendly events as well as adult and expert events. And it's natural. It's a very instinctive, biological imperative, a hardwired imperative, something that's just utterly, for want of a better expression, in our DNA, is to understand our environment, to intuit, but also to try and volitionally explore and conquer and create and move and understand. And I think anything that bridges the gap between the curiosity and the knowledge is a very, very healthy thing in our society, and I think that's why Science Festival is a fantastic event to take a child to.
Was it nice to know as well that your portrayal of Sherlock Holmes has actually directly inspired one of the events, the Sinister Scientist?
I was sort of waiting with bated breath to see what might come about, and it sounds terrific, and I genuinely wish I could go there, because, you can imagine, I've had a few conversations with policemen over my time of playing this role. And of course, there's only so much that they can talk about. I'd love to go on a crime scene, but this is sort of the perfect, safe way to do that and not get in the way of some very important and serious work, and try our hands out at the sort of expertise that I'm supposed to be a master of as Sherlock Holmes. But thank God for Conan Doyle and Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss for making me appear that way. So I was thrilled that they did that, and I'd love to visit, if only for that one event. But sadly, I think I'll be doing the real thing, as in playing Holmes at the moment that people are doing that, so I might miss it.
We can hope as well that will have actually inspired the next generation of forensic scientists, of people who've seen this on television and think, that's the job for me.
Well, you never know. There's an awful... he is the origination of fictional detectives, I think. He really is the unique template, and I think there have been an awful lot of other fantastic creations that have come since, but with him, yes, you're right, I'm sure it'll romanticize that job to a level that might intrigue people enough to try and follow through and find a career in it, because it's a fascinating extension of what I think we all are genetically hardwired to do, which is to understand and ask why and how. We live day to day using that reasoning, and I think from childhood onwards, that first step into adulthood is weirdly to start asking why, to gain an understanding of your world and why it works the way it works, and how understand how it works is really what learning and becoming an adult, I guess, is all about. Yeah, I imagine it might inspire a few, who knows, but it'd be good if it did.
I confess, as a scientist, one of the things I like so much about Sherlock Holmes is that he takes the mystical and he takes what appears to be intuition, and he breaks it down and he explains how we can arrive at these conclusions based on facts, based on inference and experimentation.
That's what's extraordinary about him. He has a sort of superhuman ability, but it is actually a very human-studied, achievable ability. It is an extraordinary effort and requires a hell of a lot of sacrifice, which is maybe why he's slightly sociopathic at times and impatient with mediocrity and the sort of mundanities that most of us are graceful enough to put up with a bit more patience than him. But, he genuinely achieves what he is capable of by hard work. So that is inspiring. And he unpacks the mysteries of the world. And to me, that's, again, it's this age-old question about what mystery is, what the unknown is. We can all stand in awe of the unknown and the majesty of what it is that we're a part of in this life. But I think the beauty of science is that it is as beautiful to me as any religious or spiritual revelation. To have an understanding of your world, there's so much to wonder at, even though we have a really specific understanding of these things that we wonder at. I don't think that diminishes the romance of these discoveries. It's still... You can still be in awe of something, even though you understand it. And I think that's what's remarkable about Holmes. And obviously, he does it with a flourish, which is entertaining, and that can be quite fun. He likes to pull back the curtain on the Wizard of Oz. He likes to see, what's going on, what's making the machine work, rather than just standing back and going, "Gosh, isn't that just fantastic?" And I think that's a good thing. I think I can completely see why that marries with scientists and their investigation of the world.
Some of your more recent roles, in particular in Star Trek and in the new Radio 4 adaptation of Neverwhere, involve touching on aspects of science. Obviously, Star Trek being science fiction, there's a lot of cosmology, a lot of space flight. In Neverwhere, there's a lot of discussion and the effects of altered states of perception. So do you think that actually, through discussing these issues in art, we can, for example, with Star Trek again, we can encourage people to look more into space technology? With Neverwhere, we can encourage people to consider the effects of altering our perception and the way that this may affect them culturally rather than necessarily in terms of scientific facts.
Yes, I think any gateway into appreciating science and investigating the real world of science in more detail is welcome. And I think if sci-fi or fantasy fiction can do that, that's great. Sometimes fiction and art can marry with science, and that's a great thing. I mean, we were working in this extraordinary space in a lot of the sequences that we did for Star Trek, a real location in Northern California, not far from San Francisco, called NIF, the National Ignition Facility. And it's a place where Ed Moses and his team of extraordinary scientists are basically trying to create fusion, not fission, but fusion. They're trying to create hydrogen fusion. And they're using lasers fired at the most extraordinary speed through various lenses that reflect the rays and change them from X-rays to gamma. I can't remember what they end up with when they hit the target, which is half the breadth of a human hair of hydrogen in this huge cell, hopefully one day, and I think it is a question of when, not if, create this new alternate energy supply. It's terribly exciting. One burst of this could power San Francisco for over a year. I mean, it is the stuff of science fiction. And yet there we are running around pretending that we're in space doing certain things that I can't talk about because the film hasn't come out yet. And we're in this amazing futurescape that's there now, that's part of our lives and culture now. That was really exciting and exhilarating. And there was a huge trade-off between the scientists working in the facility and all of us with our truckloads of cameras and dollies and lights and bells and whistles of the circus and us running around and all the actors in costume and our interaction with these people. They loved it and we loved being with them. It was a really special moment, actually, a really, really special moment. It was a privilege for us to be there, and they loved the entertainment of seeing this crazy circus come to their town. And so, yeah, I really do think there is great fruit borne by literature and art and music and film and any form of expression that can go beyond pure science, that can intrigue and really captivate people, motivate people within the world of science, but also outside to take an interest in science. And I think that's great.
So why do you think these sorts of specifically public science festivals are actually very important?
At the top of it all, you have what it clearly is about this festival, which is a communication between science and an audience. It's about informing an audience. And it's also just a recognition, I think, in a moment to taking time to understand the benefits of the immense hard work and endless patience of every scientist that we all encounter every day. And the advancements, no matter how small they may be, or no matter how big they may be, that's the launching board, I think, for this. And it gives us a greater understanding and access to those scientists and the science that is conducted and the people involved. So I think it also invites in a very broad family of an audience. I think, literally a family. I think from children to experts to adults with an amateur interest. There is a very, very, very broad program that everyone can get involved in. And I think it answers to that curiosity we all innately have, which is to ask why, a thing that begins in childhood and hopefully doesn't stop. I mean, think about the children's events. There's the school zone, which is students putting on I think from a secondary school and sixth form college, and they're the experts and they're showing what's happening in schools either as part of their curriculum or in after-schools clubs, and it's a chance to see them demonstrating what they might be capable of as our next generation of scientists and engineers and mathematicians. And then there are events for children like Not So Scary Skulls, which I think is on the 16th of March, which children are introduced to some of the weird and wonderful skulls of other animals and discover what they look like underneath their skin. And then for the even younger ones, there's this event called Crash Bang Squelch on the 16th again, which is fun and weird and just crazy experiments. And I think it'll be a pretty hands-on experience for children to really physically engage with science. So everything from the theoretical to the practical, everything from the amateur interest to the expert eye, I think is going to be catered for. And I think that's really important, to have a focus on the world of science and the scientists who work so hard in that world. So I'm thrilled to have been asked to be part of the festival.
If you were able to teleport away from your busy recording schedule, what events would you try and come to at the festival? Well,
obviously, top of the bill would have to be the interactive crime scene on the 16th of March, because while I fictionally portray someone who's rather adept at dealing with situations in that environment, I've never had that experience in real life for obvious reasons. Yeah, I think it could be a lot of fun, although I would rather it be completely in private with no one else around, see how truly awful I am compared to the number one consulting detective that I play in The Shape of Sherlock. But I'd love to go to that one, and also I'd love to see there's an open afternoon at the Institute of Astronomy, and astronomy is a big interest of mine. And apparently there's going to be lots of talks and displays and demonstrations and again, some more hand-on activities, which is great. It's such a broad mixture of interaction, from talks and discussions and panel discussions and Q&As to letting us be the scientists experimenting and experiencing the environment at first hand, which is really great. There's, what else? Oh, Tim Radford, who's an interesting writer, former science editor at The Guardian. He's chairing a panel discussion on the future of energy, which I think that sounds like it's going to be very interesting. And I think Richard McMahon and Julian Allwood, Emily Shuckburn, Tony Ralston are all talking on that topic. I can see in the program in front of me. That would be something I'd very much like to hear. I'd love to see Barbara's event called Smarter, where I think the teenagers themselves are actually going to be leading a discussion talking about performance-enhancing drugs, study and learning better drugs. I mean, I remember way back in the midst of the time when I was doing my A-levels and what have you, taking Pro Plus, which is just a pure caffeine pill. I know that's still readily available. There's such an accent on performance testing and grading in education, and the sort of sick irony of that is it turns students into people who have to achieve based on exam results and coursework and testing, and it puts a massive pressure on very young people. I don't know what the answer is, and I'm not an education expert, but it worries me that people feel under such pressure that they have to take drugs that could have quite long-lasting or even short-term, if not long-lasting, side effects. I think it's brilliant that people are standing up and talking about this subject who are actually experiencing it, rather than it being a dry discussion of experts who are well outside the age of people affected by the discussion. So that's something I really, really wish I could be at. But sadly, teletransportation not being possible in our lifetime quite yet, and me being somewhere else means that I probably won't be able to make them, but I'm going to try. But funnily enough, I will be playing a fictional consulting detective in a crime scene, probably somewhere in Wales or London, filming the third series of Sherlock. So if I'm not there, think of me as you're going around the interactive crime scene, and good luck to you who do it.
Are there any scientists that you're aware of that you'd be particularly keen to play? Is there anybody whose life you think is very interesting and would be a good challenge as an actor?
Alan Turing. I would say that, wouldn't I? But I mean, I'm lined up to play Alan Turing in a film called, the working title for it's called The Imitation Game. It's a fantastic script about his work at Bletchley, but also his life after that and his work on Christopher, the first calculus machine computer in Manchester. So that's the first one that comes to mind, and very specifically because I'm just beginning my thoughts about him and my investigation of him, and what an extraordinary hero of science he was. He really was. And all too late came the apology from Gordon Brown, I think in 2007, for a man that was hounded for his sexuality and completely overlooked for his utter brilliance. I mean, the man was at the forefront, let's say. I don't want to claim too much for him, but he cracked the Enigma code, which basically led to winning the intelligence war in the Second World War, which was a massive, if not the most crucial piece in the puzzle for our victory. And then he went on to do that little thing of inventing the computer. I mean, the guy's extraordinary.
For those that don't know, you really do have an impressive roster of scientists that you have played. Could you take us through a couple of them?
Sure. Well, in the real world, I played Stephen Hawking and Heisenberg and Joseph Hooker, the botanist, Heisenberg, the nuclear physicist, Stephen Hawking, the astrophysicist. I mean, so extraordinary disciplines and extraordinary characters at crucial junctures of their lives as scientists. God knows why. I've been asked to play those roles. I mean, some of them were parts I sought out. I mean, I very much wanted to audition for the role of Stephen Hawking. Some of it is to do with just having a vague resemblance, and I think then on top of that, maybe an ability to have an interior life which can suggest the level of intelligence that Stephen Hawking has without, sadly, in my case, being able to touch it. But when I'm researching a role, what I've always tried to do is get to a level where I can cope reasonably well with the science that's involved in our story. So I'm not doing a complete injustice by just pretending, but trying to embody, trying to actually inhabit those moments of discovery by understanding them. And I certainly did that with Stephen and Heisenberg as well. And Joseph Hooker as well. I mean, I went to Kew Gardens and I looked at the original manuscripts and presses and talked to experts about his work and found out about the conditions of travel and how extraordinarily fragile the whole process was for botany in those days and how perilous. I mean, the man would scale mountains to get the right sample and then cross the seven seas for months on perilous journeys where people would be struck by all sorts of maladies and meet all sorts of disasters, and all to get back to Kew and write it up and catalogue it and give the world the information they needed about a far-flung species of plant. I mean, he was incredible people doing incredible things, and Heisenberg at this crucial juncture of the war and this relationship with Niels Bohr and his wife Greta, and it's just an extraordinary group of people. And then playing Stephen Hawking was such an extraordinary privilege. I mean, to spend time with the man, to meet him both before and during, it was very daunting, I have to say. I mean, I've an amazing man, and I'm sitting opposite him feeling utterly inferior and being very far away from who he is now. And I'm trying to portray him at a time in his life which, even if he could give me the most fantastic insights and demonstrations of what he was like, he is still a man, was a man then in his 60s. So, it was very, very daunting, but all I needed was a smile, and I got one, and I felt blessed. And then I just went to work and tried really hard to do him and the script justice. And he came on set one day and said, very good, very realistic, about a scene we were doing in a quad in Cambridge. And you really don't need any more encouragement than that from a living scientist, to try your hardest to do the best job possible. So, and to feel that you're at least getting somewhere with it. So I was over the moon, and we've been friends, and him and his family and I have been friends ever since, which kind of neatly ties this up, because that's the reason I'm talking to you. I met him most recently in Barbara's company, which is how this whole conversation about the Cambridge Science Festival began.